Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the 10-minute Bible lesson. We've had a lot of lessons from the book of Psalms. And before that, we had an awful lot of lessons from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So we have a couple of more lessons from Psalms, and then we're going to be moving to another subject. So just kind of to give you a little information. Now today, we're going to be looking at Psalm 139. Now, why are we going to be looking at this psalm? Because this psalm contains, like all psalms, has really good information, but this has information about who made us and where we come from. And I think that's really important, especially because there's a crisis in our culture about identity. And I think it's really, really sad, and it's so unnecessary. That is to say, people are confused about who they are and what they are. But listen, we don't need to be, because all we have to do is look in the Bible. The Bible is an amazing book full of answers to the questions that we wonder about. And we're going to look at that today, and we're going to begin in verse 13 of Psalm 139. Let's go ahead and read it. The psalmist said this, he says, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb." So we see in this psalm right from the beginning, right from the get-go, that the psalmist tells us who formed us. That is to say, he said, "You formed us." And when he said "you," he meant God formed us. In other words, our Creator, the reason that we're here, the one who made us, who gave us life. Listen, he didn't just create our life, but he is the author of all life. And so right at the beginning, he tells us where we come from. Now let's go ahead and look at verse 14 in Psalm 139. So he goes on and says this. He says, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." So when I'm looking at this and thinking about who made us and where we came from, actually, it kind of makes me feel good. I mean, it gives me a sense that my life and my existence has meaning and has purpose. And I think that's really important for us to know. And it makes us kind of feel good about that we kind of know where we come from, and we know that there's a reason behind our existence. Now, I have to ask the question about this. What about the people who don't believe that? So what is it that they believe if they don't believe that God created them? They must believe that they're here either by somehow some aliens came from some planet and put people here, and if that's the case, where did the aliens come from? Or they must believe that we evolved. And that's a big reach. That's a big reach. And the reason it's a big reach is because you have to believe that organic life came from inorganic life, or our life came from that which was not life. And that's a big jump. I mean, I've never seen that with my own eyes. Always life comes from life. And so if that's the case, and that's what they believe, they must believe that it was an accident, that it was just fate, so to speak. And so their life is an accident, and their life really doesn't have a creator behind it, but they're just here by chance. How would that make them feel? I would have to say it would make them feel very empty. Now, the psalmist didn't feel that way, because he didn't have those feelings, and he knew where he came from. And what, because he knew that, it caused him to praise the one who was responsible. And in praising the one who was responsible, he acknowledged something. He acknowledged the masterful creative powers of God in creating the human body. It's an amazing thing because he said, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that is an amazing thing. Now, another thing he said at the end of that psalm, and he says, and my soul knows right well. Well, let me read that. He says, and that my soul knows very well. In other words, he had settled it in his own mind where he come from, and he knew it. That's more than I can say about a lot of people. Well, let's go ahead and read verse 15 of Psalm 139 and go on and see what it says. He says, my frame was not hidden from you, that is from God, when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Now, I don't understand that exactly, the lowest parts of the earth, but I do understand this, that he made our frame and that he created us, and we were created very artfully and very skillfully. Those things weren't unknown to God. They weren't hidden to God. And so God in his work, it was like when he created us, it was like a work of art because it says that he skillfully made us. In other words, there's no one like you. There's no one like me in all of the world. Almost 8 billion people, and there's no one just like you. And the reason why God made you that way. Now let's look at verse 16. Psalm 139, 16. He says, your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there was none of them. Really? Now that's something. So God saw us before we were formed? How does that make you feel? He knew about our DNA. He knew about all of the genes that make us who we are. And he says they were written in his book. Now that's something. God has a book that contains the genome of every human being. I can tell you, that's quite a statement. And then he says this. He says, the days fashioned for me. Now think about that. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there was none of them. In other words, before there was a single day in our life, God had fashioned our days. Now that is an amazing thing to me. And it makes me wonder why anyone would take the life of an unprotected, innocent baby in the womb, especially when God created everything about that baby and even fashioned the days of that child before the child was even born. Isn't that a horrible and terrible thing to cut off that opportunity and that purpose from that person's life? And to me, it just amazes me. Now let me read the last two verses for us. That's in verses 17 and 18. It's Psalm 139, 17 and 18. He says, how precious also are your thoughts to me, O God, how great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. And it's a great way for the psalmist to end this little Bible lesson, because he expresses to God in a great way what God has done and thinks about the thoughts that God has toward us. He says, when I think about the sum of those thoughts, he says they're like the sand of the sea. And then he says they're so precious. And so I think he was just in awe of all of that, and we should be too. What a great psalm that gives us our identity and helps us to kind of get our bearings about who we are, where we're going, and those types of things. So listen, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you'll join us again, and I hope you have a really good week this week.